Hey there. Thank you so much for your interest in applying for one of our internships coming up for watercitizen.org, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is focused on our waterpreneurship initiative to support people who are trying to bring water innovations to market and make a bigger difference in the world. So how do we do that? And what is your role? First of all, I just want to let you know that if you are at all interested in a wide array of skill sets and in the arena of water and the environment, climate and sustainability, public health and public service, communications, education, and especially online education, as well as artificial intelligence for small businesses for public good, right? These are things that we are going to be working on over the coming year, and particularly the coming weeks during the winter break and the following winter trimester or winter spring term, however your school does it. So we are interested in interns. If you can, well, we need to know how long you're available, right? So just make a commitment. I can do it between now and the start of the spring semester, the day after Martin Luther King Day, right? Or something like that. Or that you can stay through the end of the semester. Now, I do want to point out, before we go any further, this is an unpaid internship. Right. We are a small nonprofit. We do not have the funds right now to pay anyone, including myself. So all of the funds that come in go to pay for platforms and venues for our live event, in-person events and travel to other people's events to get them to come to our events, and all sorts of things like that. So just want to make sure that's very clear. This is an unpaid internship. And for the foreseeable future. And so we are happy to work with you on any sort of arrangement with your school for you to be able to get course credits if that is something that is required. That is something that we do rely on the interns. The interns are expected to take care of that. So it's your job, if you want to get credit for this, to contact the school to make sure we have the proper form, to make sure we know the deadlines, all that kind of stuff. But whatever it is you need to do, if you need to do like a project while you're doing the internship, we can work with you on that. But we also need to make sure that you are working on the things that we need work on. And there's a lot to do. So I'm sure that regardless of your background, if you're interested and you're committed to showing up and doing the work as we are doing the work to really, send our waterpreneurship initiative through the stratosphere, going from the MVP or minimally viable product programs and events that we've done, over the past several years, and turning them into full build out to really have an impact in the coming year. Then we'd love to talk to you. So, if you click below, you'll see after you finish the video, so finish watching the video, but after you watch the video, you want to click below and it'll ask you for your name and email and that kind of stuff, and it'll take you to a page that has specific instructions for some things that we like to see prior to setting up an interview, right? So send us you'll be sending us the requested information, and then you'll be able to set up an interview and we'll have a little chat. And if it seems like a good fit, we'd love to work with you. So let's talk about what's coming up. So as of today's date, which I'm recording this on December 27th, 2025. So right towards the end of the year. So people are done with various holidays and things like that. And having another week off before, through New Year's, before things start perking up again and offices start opening up again. So this is a really important time for a lot of waterpreneurs. And when we say waterpreneurs, we're talking about people who have some kind, are taking a water innovation that they've created or purchased a license to, whatever, and bringing it to market. That means bringing it to someone who's actually going to use it. It is one thing to do innovations in a research setting, in a lab, the universities or whatever, where their main job is to go win more grants to do more research, right? As opposed to taking an innovation and trying to find a market that needs it, trying to figure out how their innovation is going to support that specific market, and how to connect and bring to market their innovation, right? As well as coming up with the funding to do that, because as an entrepreneur, they may not be able to get those research grants, right? So there's a huge gap between doing innovation in a research lab or something like that, or self-funding your research in your basement while you're working another job, and then figuring out how to take it to market, right? So, anyway, and by the way, for people who have an interest in water, the environment, sustainability, climate, yada, 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 often they're trained in some kind of specialty, right? Some kind of science or engineering or economics or law or policy analysis, whatever it is, right? It might even be trained to be sort of an in-house sustainability person for a larger established business. So, some of these sustainability MBAs, for example. But almost never do people with water related backgrounds get trained in waterpreneurship, right? And so that's starting to come about, but often, it's kind of expected that you're either going to be in grad school or working for a university where you get access to research labs, or working for a professor or something, while figuring out your business plan at the business school, and then you spin off, right? Those are called spin-offs, right? Somebody else is paying for the research, and then you spin it off and turn it into a business. And for our sake, we consider nonprofits to be businesses as well, and we do have a business plan. So that's also something you might be able to work on, is helping us as we revise our business plan to focus on this waterpreneurship initiative, and actually to go seek funding from foundations, or even investors in a program. What do they call it? I'm going to forget again. It's a program. I don't know why I keep blanking on this. Basically, it's a program, PRI, program related investment, or project related investment, right? So a nonprofit can take investment dollars that are zero interest or low interest or something like that, but where it's not just a grant where we just keep it and it never gets paid back. We have to pay those back, from the money that we make, because we have that early investment. So it's a really cool approach, especially for nonprofits to take. And even for some early stage nonprofits, say, you know what, we're going to be able to generate this amount of revenue over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. And from that, we're going to be able to pay you back. Because too often when people in the water space try to raise money, they say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to, this is our market. That's how much, how many gazillion dollars there is invested in water, and you have to invest in our little startup because water is life. Well, when investors, money people, whether it's an investor or a board member or a legislature or whatever, hears water is life, they're thinking, oh my God, you're trying to get water to people who are so poor they don't even have water, and they're going to die if they don't get this water. So how the hell are they going to pay for the water so that the people that are getting those payments can pay back the investors, right? So we don't say water is life, just so you know. Anyway, so we've got the business plan coming up. And by the way, we are using AI to help us with that. We're also developing our AI clone. We've gotten into a very exclusive little clone accelerator by a top online entrepreneurship coach who works with people on developing their clones so that they can get out there and do all the social media stuff and everything that allow a small organization to be seen and heard and connected with, which is really important, especially when we are in a sector that is dominated by really large organizations, right? So you have these large public water utilities or private, investor-owned utilities, or IOUs, right? That doesn't mean I owe you money. It means investor-owned utilities. You also have ginormous consulting firms and contractors and vendors, and what's been happening as more and more money is going to water. A lot of these the old school principal and associate, owned engineering firms, environmental science and consulting firms been bought by much larger ones. So you get these mega conglomerates of environmental consultants all over the world and contractors and whatever. And often the environmental and water work is sort of preliminary to bigger construction projects. So um, anyway, so you've got these huge organizations out there, government bodies, private bodies, nonprofits, mega nonprofits, mega universities that do all this water research. And then you have these little teeny tiny startups. And people tend to think that startups in the water space are all kind of, grad students who decide, oh, I don't want to get a job, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. And they're going to spin off. And aren't they cute? Yes, they have no experience. They don't know anything about water, but they spent a few years in their professor's lab and now they're going to start a business. What actually happens, and this is what we see at our events, is more often there are people who have a significant amount of experience. They came in early, right out of school. And by the way, if you're thinking about going from school straight to entrepreneurship, you might want to get a job, because when you get a job as an early stage, you're basically getting paid to learn, right? You are getting paid to get experience that you need in order to get your professional engineer's license, or professional geologist license, or professional planner's license, or whatever, as well as just, and just to be a more uh, better contributor to that organization, become a leader in the space. And if at some point you decide later that you want to leave and start your own thing, you can do that. What often happens is people will get to a certain point, it's kind of middle management, and they see that there's these organizations have lots of low-level people kind of doing the work. So these jobs are probably going to get replaced by AI if they can't get more people into the machine, right? But then they get to a point where they're transitioning from management into executive roles. And that's the point, especially if there's any kind of merger and acquisition, any kind of layoff, any kind of budget cuts. They say, oh, look at all these middle managers. Let's just fire them. We don't need them anymore. And so you end up with all these organizations have like old people up top and young people at the bottom and nobody to train them, right? And a huge generation gap. We can talk about that later. Anyway, so what happens is you get these people with lots of experience and they're not getting hired back because people say, oh, well, you're not going to want this job. It's too low level for you. You're too old. You're going to want too much money. You're going to cost us too much in insurance because, you probably have some health issues by the time you're 40 or 50 or whatever. So for these people, they're not anywhere close to retiring. A lot of them become waterpreneurs, right? So either they find themselves in a situation that they just don't want to stay at work anymore, or maybe they're in that those sandwich years. People talk about the sandwich generation. Every generation now is having to deal with this when they get to that point around their 40s and 50s where they've been taking care of children and now they're also taking care of elderly parents and they're kind of sandwiched in between. And often that's the time when they're most at risk of getting fired if they don't make it up into the upper echelon of executive roles. So, do people have time to take their mother to the doctor or take their kid to, go visit the school for if their kid gets in trouble or whatever? So that can be a time when people say, I'm going to start my own thing. Again, people don't learn how to do that. And this is actually true for consulting as well. And there's a lot of great ways for people who want to sell their expertise, not just to try to get signed on as a consultant or really a subcontractor or subconsultant to a larger organization, which is risky because they usually get paid first and maybe they get around to pay you later or not, and you really have little recourse when you're out there on your own. But to turn your expertise into products, right? So we can talk about that later. Anyway, so here's what we have coming up. So so now it's we've just finished Christmas week, and we are getting ready for what we call our watershed or your watershed year planning workshop. So this is basically and if you've ever seen this, there's a lot of people now who go online and go through this workshop with us and we'll lead you through the steps to make sure that you are ready for the coming year and you have a clear roadmap going forward and you got all sorts of support and all that. So we do that, but we do it in a more interactive way and in a way that is, let's see, that is just for other people working in water. Because, in my experience, as someone who ended up in entrepreneurship, not so much by choice, um, talk about that later, but that people who work in water like to talk to other people who work in water, and it's very hard to do that if you don't work for a large organization or if you can't afford to go to conference after conference after conference. A lot of people go to all these water conferences, are exclusive, they're expensive, and I originally started Water Citizen to be able to make it more accessible using the internet for convenings and meetings and conferences and summits and all that kind of stuff. Nobody wanted to go online until COVID. And then everybody did such a crappy job online. Everyone said, oh my God, you can't do this stuff online. We have to go back to live meetings. So if you're at a big organization with a big travel budget, you can go to as many conferences as you want. If not, and especially for a waterpreneur, it's really hard to keep going from conference to conference to conference. We call that chase, hope, and burn, right? Chase, hope, and burn is not a good strategy. So you're chasing all the clients and all the investors and all the funders from conference to conference, hoping you get a little bit of face time while burning through whatever money you have available to get some revenue in the door or some investment in the door so you can keep going. So, anyway, so we have this event. We really have planned out a whole series of programs that we're going to be rolling out. First the planning workshop, and then we're going straight into our Keys to Water in Congress for Entrepreneurship program, which we call Quickie, which is basically I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill on crack on water. Which committees do what, and who are the people on those committees, and in fact, we've got we put together some guides that we've had people work on before, and if you're interested, we'd love to have you help us update those guides. And obviously things change from Congress to Congress. They change the names of the subcommittees and who's responsible for what agency. And obviously we've actually lost some agencies, right? There've been a lot of changes in the federal government. So to understand that for members of Congress, and then so it's the people and the processes and the ways to participate. So who's your member or the member in the places where you have projects, right? So that they know that these innovations are being done in their district or in their state. And then, who's on what committee, and what's the timeline, right? So we do this early in the year so that people know what's coming up and when they can most have an impact, which is early in the development of the legislation, when the members and their staff are trying to figure out what to write, and then get it submitted, and then it goes to, gets assigned to a committee and then a subcommittee, and they'll have briefings, and then eventually they actually have hearings around introduce legislation. Anyway, so this is a place that usually if you work in water, you have to deal with policy. If you work in water, you have to deal with regulations. If you work in water, you have to work with some kind of public agencies, right? Whether that's a public, water supply or public utility, or a public wastewater system, or public regulators, right? And all that can be changed in the legislatures, whether that's Congress, state, your local city council. It's also the boards of the local water agencies. So a lot of what we teach here is very useful, even if it's for people at state level, for example. So how do you present an issue that has come up, and why it's an issue, why you are someone they should listen to, and then what alternative they have of, here's what you can do, or in some cases, which we don't do this because we're a 501(c)(3), but if a waterpreneur says, we want you to vote for or against this legislation, or for or against, having someone in a key position or whatever it is, right? So, and how to do that in a really short period of time, because people in legislatures, they're running from meeting to meeting, topic to topic, talking to their own donors so they can get reelected and all that stuff, and working on legislation all at the same time, and managing a whole team of legislative assistants and that whole thing. So, um, anyway, so that's coming up first, right? So anyone who joins, and by the way, I should back up and say we have an annual event. We've been doing this annual event since 2023. It was initially, we initially took over for somebody else who was supposed to put the event together for the US EPA, for the woman who used to head a EPA's Water Innovation Clusters program. So these were regional innovation clusters of support for entrepreneurship in Milwaukee or Chicago or Cincinnati or San Jose or wherever, right? All over the country, people were able to develop, get some funding and get some technical assistance and introductions to different federal agencies that were funding different types of innovations and get help putting their clusters together, right? And they would have these meetings of all the cluster leaders to learn from each other what works and how they can collaborate with each other, right? But it was all very regionally focused. But it would also bring in, the universities and labs and the bigger companies to help these startups that were working on problems for that region. That went away in 2018, so that wasn't around anymore. But by 2023, the woman who had run that program from 2011 to 2018, she was retiring. Good friend of ours. We often covered her events for Water Citizen Media and helped tell her story and get the word out for her. So she asked us to be on the planning committee. And then when the guy who was supposed to put the event together was getting ready to quit, asked if I could kind of step in, take over, and produce the event, which I did because as a water planner, before I went online, I was doing a lot of big events for National Academy of Sciences, Department of Energy, Colorado Water Conservation Board, Alberta Environment, blah, 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 all these things, right? So, we went back, ironically, to the in-person event space to do this event in Cincinnati, which unfortunately for that one, the other guy's name was still on it. So he's like, oh, this is my best event ever. And it's like, this wasn't your event anymore. Completely restructured it, right? And then I brought it back to DC, got a new brand, worked with a branding consultant, called it Water Pitch, the Water Startup Matching Extravaganza, which is the name I gave it back in Cincinnati. And had some challenges, but we pulled it off, right? And then we did it again the next year. In fact, DC Water invited us to use their space. They donated some time at this very expensive, exclusive, gorgeous space, right? But unfortunately, we were relying on volunteers, including someone who was very not only unreliable, was actually dishonest and started telling people that she was the producer and DC Water was the host, and everything should go through her and not to talk to me, which was very dishonest. And by the way, we don't tolerate dishonesty. We have no time. So if you're like, oh yeah, I'll just say that I can do something and then I'll get AI to write it for me and I'll submit that. We're big fans of AI when used properly and honestly. But if you think that you can say that you can do things that you can't and use AI to, um, to represent that you know how to do something you don't know how to do, don't do that. Don't lie to us. Don't ghost us. We don't tolerate ghosting. I don't chase interns. I don't have time. So if you say you're going to do something and then disappear, go off on a drinking binge, or decide that your parents want to take you on a vacation, so you're just gonna I never mind. I said I was going to do it, but now I'm not because my parents told me I need to go with them to Europe or something. Whatever, right? Honesty is really critical, and when you're working in water, honesty is especially critical because you're working in the public trust, right? So for us and for water more generally, don't lie. Um, don't misrepresent. Don't ghost. What else? Anyway, so we put together this event. So for 2026, DC Water is supporting us once again, despite all the stuff that went on with this other person last year. And so we talked to a lot of other people in the water innovation space, and there's a lot of stuff going on in water innovation, which again is different from WaterPreneurSHIP. And then the waterpreneurship people and the investors and everything, they go look for what's going on in the innovation space. And then they try to invest in that for the waterpreneurs, right? But the waterpreneurs, they end up chasing all the investors and all the innovators to the big expensive conferences. So most of those conferences are the big dogs, getting up and talking about, oh, look how innovative we are, right? They have lots of money. The startups are just kind of, we call it startups on the side. They get a little innovation hub, maybe a few like pop-up booths that if you lean on them, they fall over. Or maybe if they're on the stage, it's either one, it's entertainment, like kind of a Shark Tank kind of thing where they get to present, and then some advisors, investor types will start grilling them and telling them they don't know what they're doing and which is entertaining for the audience. And sometimes helpful, not sometimes not so helpful for the startups. Or you'll line up a whole bunch of startups and they do what we call the Miss America walk, right? So one time they get in the middle of the stage, they give their little mini elevator pitch and they walk off, right? So what we've done with the waterpreneurship experience, which includes in the middle water pitch to water startup matching extravaganza, which we're going to do full build out, 2 tracks, different themes and everything. It's all on our website, waterpreneurship.org for the event. But it's a lot for one day. But and includes both pitches by the startups sorted in different categories and reverse pitches by investors and funders and water sector clients and industrial sector clients and incubators and accelerators and prizes and challenges and everything. So everyone's got a spot, right? But it's pretty intense. The day before is what we call, so it's now a 3-day event. So the day before is what we call prep day. And that's where we're going to have on-site presentation coaching and clinics. So we got these little side rooms. So we have space for up to 12 clinics, 3 different rooms. So we might be able to actually have a track for people who can learn about becoming an investor or starting a fund or building an effective incubator or hub or cluster, right? Or an effective challenge, right? And then we have water pitch, right? And then we have what we call policy and planning day. For that, we're going to leave DC Water, and in the morning we go up to Capitol Hill. We're going to do a Washington Insiders breakfast. I'm going to get some of my contacts to come together for a breakfast and meet with whoever's left. Some people will leave. That's fine. But whoever there sticks around, they get to come to Washington Insiders breakfast, hear, what's really going on. Because usually a little startup doesn't have a government relations office or paying a lobbyist or to serve on a government relations committee for a big association. That's a lot of work and a lot of time and effort and expensive, right? So for us to have that available for the waterpreneurs and then actually go to Capitol Hill and we reserve a room where we can do a briefing. Now, who gets to present at the briefing? Now, what did I say earlier? We're going to be teaching virtually the Keys to Water in Congress program. So for those who complete that program and decide to try out an actual briefing, like a 5-minute overview, we will see how many of those we can use or that, again, it's not our position. We're not deciding what position to take on anything, but if someone is committed to showing up and they have a briefing paper ready and they're, and they can deliver it well, then they can join us for that briefing. We also, what was it again? Oh, and then there's other things that people can do. If they don't do the briefing, they can sit and join the briefing and meet the people who show up at the briefing, or they can also go from office to office with a leave behind. So how do you do a 1-pager, right? Or, if we want to do a phone campaign, how would you leave an effective phone message that says the things that you need to say? Because they write those down. They really keep track of all this, right? So, anyway, so that's going to be on day 3, Washington Insiders breakfast, and then the waterpreneurship briefing on Capitol Hill. And people can either stay and continue doing that stuff, or they can join us on the other side of town So all the Congress and everything that's on one side of town, and then you got the agencies, and then on the west side of Washington, D.C. is where you find the international community. So you've got State Department, you've got don't have USAID anymore, but you have State Department, you've got Export Import Bank, you've got World Bank, you've got International ICF. No, I'm gonna forget what it stands for. But they're the financing people, right? International financing for projects. You've got embassies. All right. So we have, other than Canadian Embassy, which is over by the US Congress, and Embassy Row up by DuPont Circle. And that's, we have almost 200 embassies and consulates in the area. And by the way, if you're interested in international stuff, this is going to be really cool. We've been talking about this Waterpreneurship Goes Global workshop. We have to put that whole thing together. It's brand new this year. And, to have people from State Department and Commerce and, trade reps and everything like that from the US and overseas to talk about, what are the ramifications for people who have water innovations. If you're in the US and you want to take your innovation to other countries, or from other countries who want to come to the US, what do you have to do? Do you have to create a US subsidiary? Do you have to create a licensing agreement with someone in the US and vice versa? Every country is different. And of course, now we have tariffs, a lot more tariffs and visas and supply chain issues. So even if you're a US company selling to US companies, but your widget or gadget or whatever you make is outsourced overseas to cut costs, and now suddenly, oh my God, it's going to cost 3 times as much because of tariffs. So there's lots of issues, right? Buy American, what does that mean? How much of your product has to be made in the US? All these things. So get that explanation out to the waterpreneurs, their investors and advisors and accelerator leaders and all that kind of stuff. So this is going to be new. And so if you want to work on this stuff, if you are maybe an international relations major or thought you were going to have a career at USAID, now that's not an option, which by the way, that creates a vacuum, right? All the people who used to do international, relief kind of work, global wash, domestic wash for people who don't have basic water and sanitation, they might become washpreneurs, right? They might become people who create a business around those services because that's no longer going through, USAID and the big contractor that then subcontracts other people who have innovations to take those to other countries, right? So, yeah, I think that covers it. So, again, that is going to be May 4th through 6th here in Washington, D.C. And if you're not in Washington, D.C., and you do the internship and you're able to come out here, we might be able to help you find a place to sleep. So you can participate in the event. And if you're already in DC, hopefully you'll be able to come. And if not, we do everything virtually. If you're here in DC, let me know. Or if you're able to get to DC, let me know. We can meet up in person. But primarily, we're doing this all virtually, right? So, we got the virtual event coming up January 2nd, this planning workshop. And during that time, we're also going to offer our Water Entrepreneurs Leaders Lab, or the WELL, which is a virtual mastermind, meets once a month of other waterpreneurs I'm a certified mastermind facilitator. And if they join that, they get a free ticket to the live event other than a $97 meals and materials fee. Right, so it just covers their meals, and if they don't show up, you'll say, "Yeah, I'm going to come." We buy all this food for them, and they don't show up, that we have to eat the cost. So, print them notebooks and all this other kind of stuff. So, yeah, the other way they can do it is they can buy a ticket, and then they get free access to the masterminds and through the event. So, same price either way. Anyway, this is just how we're rolling this out, right? So, because we're adding a lot of new things this year. So they have that January 2nd, and then we're going to immediately go into the Keys to Water in Congress program. And that's going to be in about 6 weeks, and we're going to invite some of the folks in the policy space who are gearing up for the next year's Congress, and invite them into our class so that the waterpreneurs can ask them questions. Because, if they're creating an innovative technology because their clients said, oh, we need some for PFAS, because the law tells them that they need to meet some level for PFAS. And so they're trying to get that to the clients, and then the law changes and they say, oh, no, PFAS isn't an issue anymore. We don't care about PFAS. And suddenly the business goes away. right? So the startups need to know that their clients are responding to regulations and laws, right? So anyway, same thing for lead, same thing for 1,4-dioxane and whatever the contaminant is, whatever the, issue is, the problem that they are solving, chances are there's some kind of regulatory driver or barrier, right? So anyway, so Case of Water in Congress, January, February timeframe. And then we got what's that? Oh, and then we start we're going to have a summit. So we're also, as people sign up, we're going to start interviewing them and have a chance for them to practice their pitch before the summit. And that summit is going to be released sometime in March. We're still nailing down the dates, but I think we'll do it between the Water Reuse Association's March meeting and the Utility Management Conference, which is both American Water Association and Water Environment Federation. So these are two of the biggest associations out there in the water utility space. By the way, we're not just water utilities, but a lot of people in industry go to those events also. So, so sometime in March, which is also when World Water Day is when we're going to release that. And then April is when the whole water community comes to Washington, D.C. for their fly-in. It's called Water Week, waterweek.us. So, we'll have our training done well before all the fly-ins. So a lot of people are members of associations, professional associations, industry association, the Groundwater Association, the American Society of Civil Engineers. They all come to DC around, late February, March, April. Right. Maybe May, and June is already kind of late because what happens on Capitol Hill is the legislation is written and it goes to subcommittee and then it goes to committee and then it, gets passed in one house. And then once it either gets killed at some point along the way, if it survives all the way through to getting passed on the floor of the House or the Senate or whatever side started first, then it switches over to the other side. Or sometimes you'll have someone introduce the same bill on both sides, and then they have to get a Congress or a conference and work it out. And then it goes to the president. And, you can just look up, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill and listen to the song, and that tells you everything you need to know, basically. But, within the water space, a lot of different folks getting involved. So we're trying to empower waterpreneurs to be their own advocates, to or at least to know how to communicate and be a resource for policymakers. So they say, hey, I am really dedicated to supporting efforts to get rid of lead-based pipes, so much so that I started a business in this, and I've gained a lot of expertise. And if you and your staffers are trying to write a bill on this issue, I'd be happy to advise you or to come to a briefing or whatever. Because as a waterpreneur, you have some freedoms that you can't do if you're an employee of a larger organization, right? Often you can't just show up and do testimony on Capitol Hill or as a state legislator if you're working for somebody else. But you can when you start your own company. So we're trying to develop leadership. We're trying to develop expertise on the things that are not already covered by your typical incubators and accelerators on how to write a business plan, how to do a pitch deck and all that kind of stuff. So how do you do this in the water space? How do you get to the point where investors will invest in you? Because usually the investors, they don't get involved until you really have traction, they call it, right? You got to get some money in the door. You got to have your pilots done and all that kind of stuff. So there's a gap between the research that's done, say, at the universities or in somebody's basement, and then you're trying to get it to market, and there's nobody funding that time. And then they wait to see who survives, and then they fund the rest, right? So anyway, it's a really exciting opportunity. I know I've been blathering way too long. But it's if any of this is of interest, go ahead and click below. Fill out the forms. And like I said, we're going to have, we got to set up all these virtual trainings in the months leading up to the event. We also have virtual pitch prep and practice sessions with people who are really good at advising people on their pitches, and especially from accelerators and whatnot that are related to water and the environment, right? So they actually know about what works and what doesn't in that space. If you have someone who doesn't understand water and they listen to a pitch that's designed for someone in water, for water investors or water clients, they say, oh, well, I don't understand that. Therefore, nobody's going to understand that. You have to take all that stuff out. But if they're in water, they know that you have to mention this legislation or this regulation or this technology or whatever, because people in the know that, right? So anyway, um, yeah, so obviously we got a lot going on. And by the way, as I think I mentioned, I'm also in this clone accelerator because, it's most of the work's been done by me. And if I have other things going on, if there's you know, a, somebody decides they want to sue us for some reason, or a member of my family gets sick, or I get sick or injured, or whatever, or I have to go chase an intern who says that they're going to do something and don't show up. That's why I don't do that. Then communications videos like this don't get made, and editing videos like this and make them really short, that takes even longer, right? It's kind of like Mark Twain said, "Sorry, my letter is so long, I didn't have time to make it shorter." So just want to give you a quick overview of what's going on. And or maybe not so quick, but if you're interested, just go ahead and click below. Give us your name and email so I know that you're applying. Get all your materials in. We'll set up an interview. If you're fit, great. Let's get you on board, right? Let me know what your schedule is when you start classes again, if you have classes, how much time you have available, what you can commit to, what kind of requirements you need to get credit for an internship if you need that. Or for an intern project or something. Yeah, let's take it from there. So thank you very much for watching if you got this far. And if you're interested, apply. If not, nice that you came, but have a nice life. Bye.